Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Naomi Van Groll. I'm the Publishing Manager at Sydney University Press. To begin our proceedings today, I'd like to introduce Professor Lisa Jackson Pulver, Deputy Vice-Chancellor, Indigenous Strategy and Services, who will give an acknowledgement of country. Thank you, Lisa.
Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, I love that. It is just a beautiful day because it didn't look like this just 8 hours ago when we all came into work. But it is an absolute joy to be able to acknowledge country here today. And I know many of you never tire from taking a little bit of time to pay our respects. One of the things that's important is how it is we use language and how we recognise the language that we have in an institution like this is at the very heart of our culture. And certainly for Aboriginal people of this land, it's something that connects us all to country. Niani, Nalawangan, Mari, Bajari, Garanyurada. We meet today together on very beautiful Gadi country. I pay respects to the Gadigal and to those many ancestors of you all, and to all of those who will come after us. The language that we spoke just a moment ago is a very ancient one, and it's at the hearts of the lands of the university's first campuses here at Camperdown and at Darlington. It's fitting that the language of the Gadigal is at the entry of many a place, including our beautiful museum down the road. It's fitting that it's at the start of the book that's being celebrated here today. And I'm delighted that this language also opens this event here on Gadigal campus. Using language is an act of respect of peoples of this place, which has been the site of learning, of knowledge exchange for well over 60,000 years. We're very fortunate indeed for the work of noted linguist Professor Jacqueline Troy and the many Gadigal language holders of this place for helping this language become known in circles wide and deep. Here on the Gadigal campus, we're in a position to make a concerted effort to include appropriate language in our everyday work. Many understand our collective role on this land to do better and to consider our responsibilities and how we belong here and our own obligations into the future. How we describe things, what we call things, and the proper use of Australian languages, which in this area, of course, is Gadi, is very much a part of that. One of the ways to be thoughtful and genuine in our practice of acknowledgement of country is to do this. Just take a moment now and reflect on the journey that you've undertaken to get here today. Think about whose countries you crossed to get here. Think about their names if you know them. And remember, knowing each land is unique, each carries an embedded knowledge of traditional custodians, and each with ways of being and doing that have the capacity to centre our work, our teaching, our research, to focus our pursuit of higher learning with deep respect. There are also generative benefits from actively participating in acknowledgement of country and thinking about the journey that you've taken to be here today. When done from our own gratitude for the lands on which we live and work, the acknowledgement not only demonstrates respect for the history of learning that is the ongoing legacy of Aboriginal people's care for country, it also opens the space for us all to be present, to reflect on this moment in time and to take stock of this amazing place that all of us call home. The message I'd like to leave with you in this brief acknowledgement is this. The onus is on each and every one of us to understand what it means to belong, to understand the language, to know the history, good bits and terrible, to be courageous and to own it. And in so doing, we'll be able to not only pass that belonging to future generations, but to be very much a part of the solutions, that many of us want to be a part of for the many wicked issues that we need to tackle if we're going to be here for another 1,000 generations. The university was founded in the geography of this land. The sandstone, the mortar and the woods are all from here. It's our opportunity now to draw inspiration from knowing this place and engage with its very long history. This has always been a place of learning, knowledge exchange and belonging, and for that we must always pay respects to country. Enjoy learning from each other and sharing your stories. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lisa. The Press is very proud to have worked in partnership with the University of Sydney and with experts from a range of universities around Australia to publish Australian Universities, A Conversation About Public Good. This afternoon, we will hear from a number of speakers on topics that are raised in the volume. Afterwards, there'll be refreshments and an opportunity for you to buy a copy of the book. I would now like to call our host for this event, Chancellor Belinda Hutchinson, AC. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Naomi. It's great to be here. And it's our absolute pleasure to welcome you all here on behalf of the University of Sydney. Our Vice-Chancellor Mark Scott has only just got back from overseas, so I know he's busy doing some other things, probably putting in our submission for the Accord, Mary. And a special welcome to you, Professor Mary O'Kane. We're so thrilled to have you here today, and thank you very much for joining us. And to the other former Vice-Chancellors who are here today, and everybody who's come to our university. And before I begin, I too would like to acknowledge the Gadi people and their elders past, present and emerging. Because people have been coming together on these lands to exchange ideas and learn for tens of thousands of years. So it is my great pleasure to welcome you here today as we continue that tradition and launch the Australian Universities, A Conversation About Public Good. And as we acknowledge the Gadi people, it's very appropriate that the book's first chapter is by our own Lisa Jackson Pulver and Peter Greenfield. And it reflects on the experience of creating this university's One Sydney, Many People strategy and explores what it means for a university and the community of students and staff to have a real connection to country. Lisa, thank you for that wonderful acknowledgement of country. As usual, you give us real reason to reflect on the lands we're on, and I came from the Cammeraygal people's lands, so I do reflect each time I travel about that. So earlier today I was on Cammeraygal land and I was talking to a group of business leaders on the secret successes of Australian universities. And as I travelled back to campus, I thought about that. Why is it that so many of the successes of Australian universities do indeed appear so invisible to such a large part of the Australian population or to people in public life? Universities are rolling in money and a drain on the public purse, say some. They focus too much on international students who take the places of our domestic students, say others. Their staff do research on irrelevant topics of no use in everyday life, and they're not interested in working with business or industry. I debunked all of those myths today, and those in the room today, they know that Australian universities have been a critical part of building our nation, and that we all have so much to be proud of. We can be proud that our attractiveness to international students has enabled us to educate future leaders all around the world, forging friendships and building understanding between individuals and nations. We can be proud of how our researchers are tackling the greatest challenges of our time, working in partnership with other universities, with industry, and with the community. We can be proud of our broader contribution to the Australian economy and how we generate absolute prosperity and well-being for our societies. But you all know there had to be a but. Why isn't it that this contribution, as important as it is not broadly known and understood? And what are the barriers to our universities being even more successful? So the publication of Australian universities is an important contribution to that debate about public universities, who they are, what is their mission and what it should be, what strong higher education policies should entail, and how do we enable a constructive relationship between government and Australian universities. My congratulations and thanks to Julia Horne and to Matthew Thomas for putting this together, and to all the contributors. I'm delighted that a number of the contributors are from the University of Sydney, demonstrating the significant expertise and passion among our academic and professional staff for Australia's higher education. In fact, the book evolved out of a series of 7 webinars co-convened by Julia and Matthew. The series was produced by the School of Humanities in the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences and broadcast to an enthusiastic and interested public during the depths of the pandemic. And this was one of the good things, I think, that came out of the pandemic. And so as we all recover from COVID, perhaps there are useful echoes that there are from the current Australian Universities Accord process. Many among you will know about the role the higher education sector played in the reconstruction of our economy post-World War II. And it's easy to see the parallels in our current situation. The Accord process enables and provides the opportunity to once again transform the idea of public university and to recalibrate the place of universities in Australian society. Knowledge and expertise can once again be fuel for national regeneration. We were very pleased to host the Minister for Education, the Honourable Jason Clare, here at our university when he launched the Accord process, and welcome Minister Clare's appointment of Professor Mary O'Kane, AC, to chair the panel advising him. Our Vice-Chancellor, Mark Scott, talks of universities being in the solutions business, and we have embraced the opportunity to work constructively with the government through the Accord process to ensure the public value of education and research is fully realised. And I know there's a number of people in the room who've been working all weekend on our submission, and I really thank you for what you're doing for our university, but also for our nation. As Mark said, Mary is the right person to lead the right panel of experts to tackle the complexity of the issues facing our sector, and they are really complex, but they're really worth fighting for, and we wish you all the very best, Mary, with that. As you know, Professor Mary O'Kane was New South Wales Chief Scientist and Engineer from 2008 to 2018 and Vice-Chancellor of the University of Adelaide from 1996 to 2001. In addition to chairing the panel advising the Minister on the Accord, Mary is also chair of the New South Wales Independent Planning Commission, a company director, and executive chairman of O'Kane Associates, a Sydney-based consulting practice specialising in government reviews. What do you do in your spare time, Mary? We really want to know. She has served on several boards and committees in the public and private sectors, especially related to innovation, education, energy, engineering, health, Antarctica, ICT, and research. Very, very impressive. Definitely the right person to be doing this Accord job. Mary, thank you for what you're doing for universities and for the nation more broadly. And thank you so much for joining us today, and we're very much looking forward to you. I'd like to introduce Professor Mary O'Kane. Thank you.
Thanks, Belinda, and thank you for being the Chancellor who tackles that really hard problem of making Australia understand what it's got in its universities and particularly telling industry and business about it. It's so vital. I've never been more convinced. I'm thrilled to be here today, and in speaking and in starting to speak, I'd like to acknowledge the Gadi people and pay respects to their elders past and present and pay respect to country. Years ago, I lived on Kaurna land in Adelaide, and in that period I got to know Dame Roma Mitchell. She co-opted me as a sort of lady-in-waiting, a sort of an extraordinary one. She had been, as many of you know, a Supreme Court judge, a former governor, a former Chancellor of the university, and this is absolute catnip to a Vice-Chancellor, she had told me she was going to leave a large amount of her estate to the university. So being a lady-in-waiting to Roma involved doing many things, but it involved going to her beach house at Carrickalinga. And there, early in the mornings, Roma would march down the beach in her swimmers with a bright coat over it, and I'd be more soberly dressed, walking behind, carrying towels and sun hats and sunscreen and all that stuff, and highly amused by all the kiddies on the beach, all in their swimmers, would race up and curtsy, or they'd bow. You know, good morning, Dame Roma, good morning, Dame Roma. Anyway, it was on one of these mornings, just after we'd returned to the house and were cracking into the first gin and tonic of the day, when Roma said to me, "Dear, if you're launching a book, do you think you need to read it first?" And the issue was that Justice Ian Callanan had written a bodice ripper or two, and he'd asked Roma to launch one of them. She'd had a look at the book, she'd sort of sneak peek, and she decided it was a book that she couldn't and shouldn't read. So it was something of a dilemma. I have no idea what I answered, but I can assure you that it is not a problem today. This wonderful book is one that I have read, and also one that I have actually promoted. I said to all the Accord panel they should buy it and read it, and they did. So your set of sales were, you should have got about 6 sales, and yes, I'm sure it's bringing the press in a lot of money and the things. So not only had I read it, but I read it at Christmas, and it was the absolutely perfect Christmas present for somebody who'd just started chairing a major university review. So thank you, Julia and Matthew. Thank you, contributors to it. It sort of made my Christmas. I also reread it more recently, or reread parts of it, and I was startled at how it had informed my thinking in the review, alerting me to issues that I in turn alerted the panel when they hadn't read it all, of course, and that we've returned to many times as we've wrestled with the way to shape and to form and to fund Australian higher education over the coming decades. It indeed helped our conversation, and this book is in the style of a conversation. And it does exactly what a good conversation should. It makes you think. The logic of a conversation is rarely linear. It turns and twists and brings up different viewpoints, and this book does exactly that. A good conversation inspires and paints a vision. And here I'd like to call out, Lisa, your work with Peters, your lyrical piece on the understanding of the joining of the concepts of country and university. That was deeply inspiring, and it talks in particular about the University of Sydney. Jennifer Barrett, Lisa again and Peter again, with Michelle Dixon, chart the successes and failures of trying to do this joining through recent history by looking at the achievements and the challenges of particular Indigenous students who achieved a great deal, but in the face of a great deal of challenge. This has been very important for our review, as equity is absolutely central to what we are trying to do. It's the second term of reference, and it's clear the Minister's favourite term of reference, so it's the one I hold great hope of being able to deliver on. And it's really important to us that First Nations students have the opportunity not just to go to university, but also to flourish at it. A good conversation also brings in different voices, and Samantha McMahon and Valerie Harwood alert us to the importance of listening to young people, and I would add to all students, because another part of the review is particularly talking about lifelong learners and how students of many ages will be part of our universities even more. And this idea of talking to students has been a very, very wise steer. And here I'd particularly like to call out NUS President Bailey Riley from this university, who's a wonderful national president. And she has shown us that students really do think of things differently. She and the other student groups, there are many examples, but one that she's alerted us to is that students really want to be able to move university. There are many students from the country, many First Nations students who might start in the country but maybe want to move into a metropolitan campus like the University of Sydney. It should be easy to transfer. At the moment, it is not. And talking of students, Susan Goodwin and Ariadne Vroman draw attention to the need for social citizenship for all students. I think this is a great concept. As they say, and I quote, "Positioning all young people as independent adults at the age of 18 could break the nexus that encourages the flow of intrafamilial transmissions of wealth and privilege, and the current scenario that makes going to university harder for some and easier for elite others." It's a really important thing that I've picked up and we've been tracking. Of course, some of the issues explored in the book are things that are right under our noses and we often just don't talk about. And Glyn Davis, who sends his apologies, he's in a boring budget meeting, he tells me, points out that Australia has some of the largest universities in the world. Glyn's been pointing this out for a while, admittedly, but we tend not to talk about it. It's amazing. You know, you'd think the Chinese universities might be the big ones or the Indian ones, but no, it's us. Now, what should we do? Does size matter? It's interesting that since the Dawkins reforms, there's been a great growth in the numbers, but not a growth in the number of universities. We know more growth must come to deal with the skills shortages and to deal with many other things. But will we just stay with the same number of universities? Will they just expand? Or will they sort of pop out new creations? What will it be? So that is a really big question. Alan Pettigrew's chapter is a great example of re-examining and fusing big data sets afresh, and that this can be incredibly insightful. And we've used it. We've had Alan present to the panel. We've had Glyn meet with the panel, so we've had both those views. The data Alan uses is openly available, but his analysis tells us a much more complete story than is often given of Australian research and its evolution since the Dawkins reforms. Anybody wanting to understand the evolution of Australian research should start with this chapter by Alan. It's something I'm very interested in, could give you a whole lecture on, but perhaps not today, another time. Other chapters deal with issues that we typically don't know about, things that are lost in the mists of time, sort of historical time. And Julia, your wonderful chapter on the history of international students, I learned so much from it. Things that I thought I knew that space a bit, but I don't. The very fact that there were many international students over the decades before we think of the big boom in students, but there were many here, often from modest backgrounds, often supporting themselves, often finding that Australia can be a difficult place to live if you're not white and privileged. And that was a wonderfully enlightening piece, and then wonderfully complemented by Gabi Rania's piece that examines the challenge of being an international student during COVID. This resonated a lot with me because of the book that Mats Brenner, Jonathan Grant and I produced, Crisis Response in Higher Education, looking at the same time, where we commissioned pieces, and I'm delighted that Anne Quain, who spoke about this issue, is here today. She's from this university, and also the piece by Mark Hoffman from Newcastle University went over the same ground. And talking of things in history you've forgotten, Michael Goodwin takes us through the way we often emphasise the utilitarian purpose of universities. We need universities for skills, we need universities for engineers. Well, that's a good thing, but, you know, some of the other ones are a bit odd. And we have, you know, and that we forget that governments of, you know, conservative persuasions as well as Labor governments have always, over the years until relatively recently, emphasised the need not just for technology but the importance of university and the importance of the humanities and of generic skills. And Michael does a wonderful job of pointing out how selected quoting was used in the support of jobs-ready graduates. And talking of jobs-ready graduates, again, if there's one piece you're going to read about the topic, read the piece by Tim Payne in this book. It's a wonderful summary, and one I often go back to when I'm preparing speeches on the topic, something where we're reviewing within the accord, and you can talk about that in your submission if you like. I really enjoyed Gareth Bryant's 8 Logics of Higher Education Funding, and I will be using them tomorrow. This week is funding week. We're going to solve funding tomorrow, and they actually give us a very good framework for looking at it. And as usual, Will Croucher brings a great deal of insight to things, and he has his piece not only rehearses the history and intent of HECS, but also looks at some of the unintended consequences. And that's something that we've all read about and heard about recently in the work done by Mark Orbiton. I also was very pleased to read about the building of a culture fit for purpose in a university. It's something I've been thinking about a lot, and I think I must have caught the idea from the book from Tim Soutphommasane and Stephanie Wood's piece. I think we are not paying enough attention to culture, and it's absolutely fundamental if we are to address so many things within our universities. Things like the duty of care, something the students have been raising with us, the idea of a partnership with students, and this goes back to the social citizenship notion. It also has a lot to do with what it means to be a good employer, or, to pick up Susan Peach's piece, what it means to tackle major challenges facing humanity, the role of the universities, in this case looking at climate change. And of course, one of the great challenges with the review is going back to the core business of universities, learning and teaching and research, in a world, though, these days that has a large component that is online. And I really loved that chapter on teaching and learning in uncertain times by Matthew Thomas, John Oromia, Remy Lowe, Victoria Rawlings and Susan Banky, and that it points a way forward and it shows that good teachers can be very good teachers online. So this book, you hear me use the word resonate a lot. This book has really resonated with me. It's resonated with my colleagues on the panel. It's really helped us in shaping things in the review. So I'm awfully scared. I was thinking that people are going to say, oh, well, you know, we rather than wait for the interim report, we'll go and read this. Well, I think they should. It will help them with the interim report. And one chapter that has a particular resonance for the future, the second half of the year for me, is the one by Leo Renhao Zhu on the reforms to the Taiwanese higher education system that happened roughly at the same time of the Dawkins reforms here. It's a great example of what can happen when you have unintended consequences of review recommendations. So I'm taking it to heart very much. And it's why in the second half of the year, the Accord Review will spend a lot of time wargaming potential recommendations, hopefully with all your help. So I am really delighted and really honoured to launch Australian Universities, a conversation about public good. And to say thank you for the conversation. And I want to thank all those who are engaging in the greater higher education conversation around the Accord Review. And we are very encouraged and helped by this big conversation. We're grateful to all those who have met with the review, all those who put in submissions in the first round, and all of those who are frantically writing for this round. I'm thrilled there's so many people here this afternoon. You've clearly all got yours finished. I've heard from one colleague, one friend, about cutting and pasting for doing a few things. I also want to thank the journalists, those who run websites like Campus Morning Mail, those running podcasts, Martin Betts as an example, who have kept the conversation going too. And to thank all my friends around the world who are experts in higher education systems, research and innovation systems, for those very late night emails, those very late night phone calls. Overall, it's a wonderful conversation, and it's really important that it doesn't stop when the review stops, but it keeps going as the Accord process goes on through the years. Thank you.
Thank you, Chancellor, and thank you, Professor O'Kane. We will now hear from Professor Julia Horne, University Historian and co-editor of Australian Universities.
I never thought this day would come, but I'm so pleased it has. I've travelled from Ngunnawal to Darug land and then, ended up in Gadigal land, and I pay my respects to elders past and present. That's a long journey, I might add. Look, thank you so much, Mary. I was just so delighted when I just remember tapping out my email thinking, oh, will she or won't she? And then you rang, you said, let's have a talk. And just thank you so much, because it also meant a lot to me that you'd actually read the book over Christmas, because I'm not sure I would have. I understand why, though, and I'm, glad that you kept reading it over Christmas, and it's that from what you're saying, it's actually having some impact too. Conversations about Australian universities are really important, I think, to keeping a healthy public culture, and perhaps also here it's about repairing, perhaps a slightly damaged public culture over the last 10, 15 years in regards to government relationships with universities. So that's in some ways the genesis of the book, I commend it. Now, the point of this book was actually to restart the conversation, and we've heard Mary talk about the importance of conversation, and to restart the conversation about the future of higher education. And to that end, what I didn't want was to receive a copy from Naomi saying, here's your book, and say that's the end of the conversation, we'll put it down there and won't worry anything more about it. So it did seem to me that it had to be a book which then had a series of activities. So it was actually amazing when the university's accord was announced, and I thought that's a really big activity around the book. But we also did a few here in the School of Humanities, which is my school. And one of them was, the book comes out of a webinar series, as the Chancellor explained. We also looked to organising 2 policy roundtables, so one on equity and access, which is actually a big topic of mine historically. So I've looked at equity and access in history. That's been what I've worked on for some years, and I'm doing a big project on that in the mid-20th century currently. And the other roundtable will be on international education. There's also a new podcast series, which I'm delighted to say I'll launch that now, and that's called Whose University, Whose Culture, and in fact includes this beautiful interview by Lisa, where she talks it's just a wonderful interview, very warm, and why we should all care about acknowledgement of country, and about why this whole piece around Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island strategy and policy is so important. So that's available on all your favourite podcast sites, I'm told. But there is a special call out. All those things require an enormous amount of time and effort. And so sincere thanks to the School of Humanities, and also to the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences, but unless the School of Humanities had actually got behind that original webinar series and all the work that they've done since, none of this would have actually happened. So I really, it's important, I think, to acknowledge the sort of work behind the scenes that goes on. In particular, Peter Adams, who's here and who's just in every aspect of it, has been there, and a wonderful colleague. Julianne Robson, who's also here, the same, a wonderful colleague, and just appreciate so much your guidance and expertise. And Gabrielle Kemmis, who couldn't be here tonight, but again, without her, this wouldn't have happened. Now, I want to spend just a few moments on the Equity and Access Policy Roundtable we held late last year. In particular, the conclusions it reached, as I think they're really relevant to the current discussion. And it's just really, it's like music to my ears to hear that equity is sort of such a big issue, both, in government, and it's being taken seriously by the Accord. At the roundtable, we had 20 participants, and that included 7 young people. At least one is here today. There might be some more. But and they had unique perspectives on equity, but it was really important to include young people at the table, because unless we know what they're thinking about university experiences, we can't really sort of inform future policy, I guess. And it was enlightening, things which I thought things which I thought historically, or which, when I was a student, it's different now. And we need to talk to young people to understand that. We also had academics, of course, higher education policy experts, and it was particularly good to get 2 education policy makers, one who worked in government and the other who worked in the not-for-profit sector. And Wendy Field, I know, is here tonight from the Smith family, and I'll just hold that thought in your head, Wendy Field and the Smith family, because I'll come back to that. Now, we have while a statement of these principles, it's still in the process of being prepared, I have to say, but the overarching and very broad principle to emerge from the roundtable is as follows, and I want to read it. Systemic educational disadvantage affects a young person's ability to complete schooling and thus significantly reduces their opportunity to gain tertiary qualifications and or employment. So that's the overarching conclusion, I guess, to come from the roundtable, but there's more, so I'd like to read you a little bit more. Furthermore, such systemic disadvantage begins in early childhood, and that's really important. And it's often a consequence of intergenerational poverty. To achieve the targets set by the 2008 Bradley Review for underrepresented groups of students, and that's because these targets have still not been met. For example, young people from regional, rural and remote communities, other young people from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. And we also, so one of the young people who is here tonight also made us realise that we still need to, like young people with disabilities, it's still really hard for them. If they have disabilities from their early years, that affects whether they come to university or not. So it's really important, those three groups, arguably all groups, but those three groups in particular, to adopt programs that provide not only financial support, which of course is crucial, but also as important, cultural and social support to young people from early childhood and which continues until the end of their tertiary qualification. Now, I mentioned Wendy Smith and the Smith family. That is a really excellent model, in fact. It comes from the not-for-profit sector, as does, in fact, a program at Aurora Education Foundation. It's Interconnected Pathways program. The Smiths family is called Learning for Life, and it's these types of the Smiths family one has actually been in operation for over 30 years. It has a lot of data, a lot of success, and it knows what it's talking about. But it's the fact that these types of programs aim to level the educational opportunity playing field, as it were, and to provide a fair go for all young Australians to, if they wish, complete a tertiary qualification. Now, while university equity scholarships have, of course, a really, really important part to play, they have an important place, the Roundtable believes that they will not of themselves make access fairer or help to achieve the still unmet targets for underrepresented groups of students in higher education set by the Bradley Review all those years ago. To achieve those targets, Australia really needs to tackle systemic educational disadvantage from early childhood onwards. I'm not going to tell you how to do that. I'm going to leave that to the University Accord. But it's essentially, what the point I'm trying to make, I guess, is that the Roundtable drew an important connection with a number of essays in this book, including yours, there are a few others in this book, in order to come up with a new way of thinking about higher education access and equity, which has usually, simply looked at the last couple of years of high school and how you get those students in. We're saying you have to look further back if you want to actually genuinely meet those targets. So that's sort of the mini lecture. But there are, of course, thanks due. So I've already thanked the School of Humanities. And here I want to further express Matthew's and my thanks. Really, it has been a cast of thousands who have assisted in one way or another. That includes all the presenters in that History of University Life series in 2020 and 2021. Also, of course, to the 20 authors in the collection, to the Sydney University Press team, especially Susan Murray and Naomi Van Groll, to the series editor of the Public and Social Policy series, Gabby Ramia, to the University Library for hosting the book launch, and the Chancellor for attending, to Mary O'Kane for launching, and to Susan Goodwin, Ariadne Vroman, Helen Proctor, Annika Gauya, Derek Schroeder and Stephen Garton, who in one way or another, really encouraged me, I guess, to move out of my history comfort zone into the present at least, and contribute to these discussions. All of you, everyone who I've just mentioned there, all of you are really awesome, and thank you. Finally, a special and of course very heartfelt thanks to Matthew Thomas, who will be seeing this later on this evening or whenever the video's ready. He's also awesome, and he's also a fabulous collaborator. And it's with Matthew's words that I want to end. Now, Matthew is currently at the University of Glasgow doing awesome things, but we hope he comes back too. But he did send me a note last night, which I want to read. He writes, "If this project highlights anything, it's the contingent nature of the university sector. If we do not create the conditions for universities to thrive in society and for society to thrive through universities, we risk not only their decline, but their possibility to damage the public good. Let this not be the case. Let's collectively commit to restarting the conversation and nurturing all that universities can offer." So thank you.
Thank you very much, Julia. Professor Susan Goodwin is on the editorial board of the Public and Social Policy series, as well as Sydney University Press's editorial advisory board. I'd now like to ask Susan to say a few words on the value of university presses.
Hello. I'd like to start by acknowledging that we're on Gadigal land, on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Thank you, Professor O'Kane, for launching the book and for your really deep engagement with the issues and ideas contained within it. Believe it or not, it's quite rare to have that deep engagement, and we truly appreciate it as authors. So thank you, yes. As Mary mentioned, the book gave my colleague and I, Ariadne Vroman, who's here, the opportunity to articulate a case for granting social citizenship to Australian young people. Our essay in the book is basically an argument for providing student incomes more universally by removing the parental means test that currently applies up to the age of 22. Our case is a social democratic one. It acknowledges that equal rights of adult citizens to be educated and to economic security. It also emphasises the political rights of adult citizens to be treated as adults, rather than as dependents through what is ostensibly a policy that extends childhood and normalises existing familial inequalities. Ariadne is here today, and of course we would be very happy to talk about our proposals in more detail afterwards, if you're interested. I'm speaking today, however, with another hat on, as a champion of Sydney University Press, both as a long-standing member of its editorial advisory committee and as an SUP author. So I'd like to take this opportunity to start another conversation, a related conversation, about university presses and the public good. Publishing, with the coda, that I'm not speaking on behalf of SUP, these are my thoughts alone. Publishing, as you know, is absolutely central to university work and to the flow of knowledge, strategic ideas, and accurate information required by society. Yet over the last 2 decades, academic publishing has become more and more an extremely lucrative private good, with a small number of commercial publishers cashing in beautifully on our need and our desire to circulate our work. So I'm going to make 3 brief points about university presses and the public good. First, not-for-profit publishers such as Sydney University Press provide an alternative business model for academic publishing. It is one which does not require expensive subscriptions to be paid to commercial publishers, most of whom do not pay a cent for the time and labour put into the research products they sell us access to. According to recent estimates, Australian institutions are paying more than $332 million a year in journal subscriptions, and this cost shows no sign of slowing despite increasing open access publishing. Indeed, it appears that Australian universities and individual researchers actually are paying hundreds of millions of dollars in open access fees. Most of this public money coming out of university research budgets and research grants. So often when we make our case for universal student incomes, Ariadne and I are asked, but where would the money come from? Well, I have some ideas. The second and related public good of university presses is their commitment to making scholarship readily accessible through models that enable free distribution of online versions of publications. The press has also published the first completely customisable open access textbook on Australian politics and policy. So I applaud the press for engaging in this important innovation. But more concretely, I congratulate the press on simply saving students money. Students and scholars are, of course, not the only people looking to engage with university research. I recently learned that one of my SUP volumes, called The Good Mother, was being downloaded and discussed in mothers' groups. So the image for me of clutches of women freely accessing research-based feminist essays really feels like impact to me. Finally, there is an immeasurable public good in the press's capacity and commitment to more socially just publication practices. This can be seen in nurturing specialised lists to open up new areas of knowledge and scholarship. And I'm thinking of the Indigenous Music, Language and Culture series, the Animal Publics series, all new areas that they've really broken open for the public. The press is also robustly engaging with the fact that research can be an extractive industry, doing more for the researchers than for the researched. For example, SUP acknowledges that academic publishing has been harmful and exploitative of Indigenous communities, and so has developed very clear protocols for the use of knowledges belonging to these communities. The press is also committed to publishing formats that are inclusive for people with print disabilities, highlighting the simple fact that being able to actually read scholarly publications is a social justice issue. So with those 3 points in mind, I'd like to once again thank Julia and Matthew for encouraging us to look at all aspects of university life through a public good lens.
Thank you, Professor Goodwin. I'd now like to call on Philip Kent, University Librarian, to conclude proceedings.
Thanks, Naomi, and thank you, Susan, and welcome everybody. My name's Philip Kent, and I'm very proud to be the University Librarian here at Sydney. The University Library is delighted to have Sydney University Press as part of our family. Together, we contribute a significant effort in supporting the research mission of this university. SUP's mission is to enable, support, and facilitate the dissemination of outstanding research. We are a scholarly publisher, and as Susan's explained, guided by an academic advisory board chaired by Professor Mark Byron at the moment. The press produces between 10 and 14 books per year, primarily under 9 academic series. And in recent years, we've also supported the new Chowchak Wing Museum in publishing quality works celebrating their collections and research. Unlike some university presses, we do not exist to publish our own academics, but we are delighted when we can showcase exceptional work from our own. It's my absolute pleasure to thank the extraordinary number of people that worked together to create this wonderful book. The editors and contributors, 2 chapters, Professor Julia Horne and Matthew Thomas. And Matthew, hello, and we look forward to welcoming you at some stage in the future. The 25 contributors to the book, Lisa Jackson Pulver and Peter Greenfield, Susan Goodwin and Ariadne Vrooman, Glyn Davis, Ranhao Zhu, Jennifer Barrett and Michelle Dixon, Samantha McMahon and Valerie Harwood, Gabby Ramia, Gareth Bryant, Gwilym Croucher, Tim Payne, Alan Pettigrew, Michael Goodman, Tim Soutpomasan and Stephanie Wood, John Ironmay, Remy Lowe, Victoria Rawlings, Susan Banky and Tamsin Peach, and of course the entire SUP team led by Susan Murray, Manager Scholarly Publishing, and Naomi Van Groll, SUP Publishing Manager. This afternoon, I'd also like to thank all those who contributed to this successful event. Professor Mary O'Kane for reading the book not once, but twice, and for her insightful comments in launching the book. And also, we do wish you our very best for a great outcome of the Accord. To our wonderful Chancellor, Belinda Hutchinson, AC, for hosting, Professor Lisa Jackson Pulver for her Acknowledgement of Country, as well as 2 chapters. To our additional speakers, Julia Horne and Susan Goodwin, thanks for your great support of the press, as was very obvious tonight. And to our MC, Naomi, and to all the library staff who organised this event. Our Vice-Chancellor, Mark Scott, was disappointed that he could not be here today, but my personal thanks go to Darren Goodsir from his office for his help. Please enjoy our hospitality, as Mary said, buy a book or 2, and please tell others about it. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. Please enjoy. Thank you.
Great.